The air in Red Pine National Reserve had a weight to it that weekend, cool, resin-scented, and so still it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. Ellie sat in the passenger seat of her grandparents' old RV, her forehead pressed to the glass as the trees blurred past. She was 13, restless, and already imagining the stories she'd tell her friends about camping deep in Montana's backcountry. Walt, her grandfather, drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. Marjorie, her grandmother, sat behind them, humming softly as she sorted through a canvas bag of snacks. Back in the suburbs, Claire, Ellie's mother, stood in the driveway, watching the RV disappear around the bend. She told herself this was good for Ellie. Time with her grandparents. Time away from screens. But as the taillights vanished, a knot tightened in her stomach. Claire had always trusted her instincts, even when others called it overprotective. She'd learned the hard way that ignoring that inner voice could cost you everything. By late afternoon, the RV rolled into a secluded clearing hemmed in by towering pines. The campsite was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wine through the needles. Walt set about building a fire pit, muttering about damp wood, while Marjorie unpacked the RV with the precision of someone who'd been camping for decades. Ellie wandered off a few yards, phone in hand, chasing the last streaks of sunlight filtering through the canopy. She snapped a few shots of the moss-covered rocks, the way the light caught the smoke from Walt's first attempt at a fire. Then, without thinking, she turned the camera on herself. A quick selfie, her face framed by the forest, the tents behind her, the fire pit still cold. She sent it to her mom with a simple caption, "We made it. Love you." Claire was folding laundry when the photo came through. She smiled at first. Ellie looked happy, flushed from the fresh air. But then something in the background caught her eye. Between the tents, just beyond the fire pit, a shape. She frowned, zooming in. It was faint, almost swallowed by shadow, but unmistakable, a figure. Tall. Still. Watching. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't Walt. It wasn't Marjorie. And it certainly wasn't Ellie. Claire's mind raced. Was it a trick of the light? A tree? No. She knew the difference between shadows and people. She'd learned to trust that instinct. She took a screenshot, enlarged it again. The figure's head was tilted slightly, as if studying the scene. She didn't hesitate. Claire called the ranger station, her voice steady but urgent. She explained, sent the image, gave the coordinates Walt had texted earlier. The ranger on duty, Tyler, was young but seasoned enough to know when something felt wrong. Within minutes, he'd radioed 2 deputies and was on his way. Back at the campsite, Ellie was roasting marshmallows, Walt telling a low, gravelly story about his time in Vietnam, Marjorie humming an old hymn. None of them noticed the faint crunch of pine needles beyond the tree line. None of them knew they were being watched. Tyler arrived just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the forest in deep gold. He didn't announce himself right away. Instead, he scanned the perimeter, his eyes catching on a set of footprints in the soft earth, fresh, circling the camp, doubling back. Whoever it was had been here for a while. Watching. Waiting. He followed the tracks deeper into the woods, every step deliberate. The forest seemed to close in, the air colder now. Then he saw it, a crude lean-to made from branches and a torn tarp, hidden behind a thicket. Inside, a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a small pile of personal items, a lighter, a hunting knife, and a crumpled photograph of a family Tyler didn't recognize. The sound of a twig snapping behind him made him spin, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. A man stood there, gaunt, eyes wide, hands half raised. Tyler's voice was firm, commanding him to stay still. Within minutes, the deputies arrived, and the man was in cuffs. Back at camp, Walt and Marjorie clutched Ellie as Tyler explained what they'd found, that the men had been living in the woods for weeks, watching campsites, waiting for moments when people were alone. Claire's call had likely prevented something far worse. Hours later, with the intruder taken away and the camp quiet again, Ellie sat by the fire, staring into the flames. She thought about the photo, about how close danger had been without her even knowing. Walt put a hand on her shoulder, his grip warm and steady. In her home miles away, Claire sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at the last message Ellie had sent. She exhaled slowly, the knot in her stomach finally loosening. She knew people would call her paranoid again. She didn't care. Because sometimes, instinct isn't just a feeling. It's the thing that saves you. And in Red Pine, that night, it had. The fire at the campsite had burned down to glowing embers when the forest seemed to exhale again, as if the tension that had been coiled around the clearing all evening was finally loosening. Ellie sat cross-legged on a folding chair, her marshmallow stick abandoned, eyes fixed on the orange glow. Walt was quiet now, his earlier stories replaced by a far-off stare, the kind he sometimes got when old memories crept in uninvited. Marjorie busied herself with the kettle, though her hands trembled just enough for the spoon to clink against the enamel mug. Tyler lingered at the edge of the camp, speaking in low tones into his radio. The men they'd taken away had refused to say much, just muttered about watching the woods and waiting for the right time. His lean-to had been dismantled, his belongings bagged as evidence, but the unease he'd left behind clung to the trees like mist. Ellie's mind replayed the moment Tyler had emerged from the shadows with the stranger in tow. She hadn't heard them approach, hadn't even known anyone was near until the beam of a flashlight cut through the dark. She thought about how close that man must have been while she was laughing, roasting marshmallows, telling her grandparents about school. The idea made her stomach twist. Miles away, Claire sat in her kitchen, the phone still in her hand long after the last call from Tyler. She'd listened to every detail, her relief tempered by the knowledge of what might have happened. She thought about the photo, how ordinary it had seemed at first, how easily she could have glanced at it and moved on. The image was still open on her screen, the shadowy figure now burned into her memory. In the forest, Walt finally spoke, his voice low. Back in '69, we had a saying, stay alert, stay alive. Thought I'd left that behind when I came home. He looked at Ellie, his eyes steady. Guess it's still true. Marjorie reached over, resting a hand on Ellie's knee. We're safe now, she said, though her voice carried the weight of someone trying to convince herself as much as the girl in front of her. Tyler stepped closer to the firelight. We'll have a patrol swing by in the morning, just to be sure. But I think you should pack up at first light. His gaze swept the tree line one last time before he added, sometimes these woods keep secrets. Best not to give them the chance. That night, Ellie lay in the RV's narrow bunk, listening to the wind in the pines. Every creak of the branches, every rustle in the undergrowth made her heart jump. But she also thought of her mother, how she'd seen what no one else had, how she'd acted without hesitation. The thought was a small anchor in the dark. By dawn, the camp was packed, the fire pit cold, the clearing empty once more. As the RV rumbled down the dirt road, Ellie looked back through the rear window. The forest stood silent, indifferent, as if nothing had happened at all. But Claire knew better. Walt knew better. And Ellie, now, knew better too. In Red Pine, danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it stood quietly in the background, waiting for someone to notice. And sometimes, noticing was the only thing that kept the story from ending differently. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories.